In China, they're killing people for organs. You heard that right. This sounds too dystopian to be true, but it is true. What if you uncovered a human rights abuse that was so horrific, it made you question the very soul of our humanity? When Dr. Torsten Trey learned about forced organ harvesting in China, he didn't look away. He's changed his entire career, and he's risking everything to stop it. He founded Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, a global movement nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize and honored with the Mother Teresa Award for Social Justice. In this episode, Dr. Trey exposes the dark reality of state-run forced organ harvesting still happening today, the fight to stop it, why the world stays silent, and what it takes to fight back, from the halls of Congress to the heart of medical ethics. It's a story of courage, conscience, and the battle for humanity itself. Before we begin, a quick note. Today's episode includes discussions about forced organ harvesting practices that may be difficult for some listeners. Please use discretion and take care while listening. This is an episode you won't forget. Welcome to the Bioethics Babe podcast, where we examine the tough questions in human flourishing in light of science, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Darina Grosso-Agnew. Now let's dive in. When Dr. Torsten Trey discovered the shocking truth about unethical organ harvesting in China back in 2006, he didn't just sit back. He changed his entire career. He became the founder and executive director of Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, an international medical ethics advocacy organization recognized around the world. Under his leadership, DAFOH has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 3 times and honored with the Mother Teresa Award for Social Justice. Dr. Trey is also a prolific author and researcher, co-writing State Organs and an Unprecedented Evil Persecution, a Genocide Against Goodness and Humankind, contributing to 19 peer-reviewed papers and driving landmark U.S. legislation on forced organ harvesting. From leading global petitions with over 3 million signatures to organizing a virtual World Summit with more than 1 million viewers, his work has been on the spotlight on one of the most hidden atrocities of our time. In today's episode, we sit down with Dr. Trey to hear his story, uncover the realities of forced organ harvesting, and learn what it takes to fight for justice on a global scale. Welcome, Dr. Trey.
Thank you for having me. This is a very, very special moment to be on your show.
Thank you so much. I want to start off, Dr. Trey, with when you first discovered forced organ harvesting, what went through your mind? Was it disbelief, anger, fear? Take us back to that moment.
Yeah, I was a little bit ambivalent because on the one side, I think it was like for me unimaginable that this could happen. I hear it also from other people. It's almost you react with disbelief. But on the other side, I found that there were elements that had a spark of truth. And so I took it serious and I followed this case. I was very interested in it. So I was in between of different reactions.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that something like this is happening. I think most people aren't even aware that it's happening. So could you describe what makes the urgency of this situation undeniable?
Yes. So let me elaborate a little bit more. Usually the medical profession has a privilege to, with the consent of the patient, to cross the boundary of the physical body. And that is based on this privilege, the medical oath came to being. And if you imagine that if you go on the street and somebody cuts you with a knife, that would be a crime. But actually, a surgeon with a permission does exactly the same in the operating room, and this comes with a lot of trust from the patient that the doctor will do the right thing. And that's what is basically said in the medical oath: do no harm. So when we hear that in especially in China, this practice of forced organ harvesting came to be, it is almost like a permanent calling to the medical profession to intervene, to act, to talk about it, because this is definitely a violation of the medical oath. And even after 25 years of forced organ harvesting, it is actually still as urgent as on the first day.
Hmm. And you make a very good case, because obviously when someone cuts you with a knife in the street, that's harmful. When a doctor operates on you, it's supposed to be helpful to
Yes,
heal you. But obviously,
yes.
with forced organ harvesting, that is a harmful reality that's practiced. So, what inspired you to leave your normal medical path and take on this global fight by co-founding DAFOH? Is there a personal story that or event that lit the spark?
Yeah, so it's basically I read about this practice first time in a newspaper in the Epoch Times, and first it was a journalist, and a week later there was a whistleblower, the wife of a surgeon who actually removed 2,000 corneas from 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners in China. And then later on, there came a letter from a veteran medical doctor who confirmed other aspects of this. So there was like this amount of overwhelming breaking news that really caught my interest, and I followed this case. And then later on in July of 2006, there came a report from David Kilgore, David Matters. They did phone calls to China and to hospitals in China. And in 14 cases, the hospitals replied that they have actually organs from living Falun Gong practitioners, and these are
Mm.
healthy organs, etc. So that was really the more I followed it, the more I got curious, and the more I gained actually the conviction that it is really happening. So in July 2006, I went to the World Transplant Congress in Boston, and with the hope to talk to doctors from China. And I did indeed talk to two doctors. One said he was doing liver transplants. I asked how many would they do, and he said last year, that was in 2005, they did 2,000 liver transplants, and that was a huge number compared to other countries and cities. And this was just the number for one hospital, the hospital that he worked in. So
Wow.
then I met another doctor and asked him what he's doing, and he said he was in the transition to move from Germany back to China because he got an invitation to open transplant departments. So then I said, well, uh, there are not many organ donors in China. Where do they get the organs from? And he just bluntly said, from Falun Gong practitioners, which were at that time and still are prisoners of conscience. So at that time, I heard so much, and directly even from doctors, that I said I have to do something. And it was actually at the press conference, a spontaneous press conference outside the building, where I spoke. And then I thought, wow, I'm only one doctor, one individual, one voice. What can I do? And then I said, I need to do more. And then the idea came up to start a medical organization, which became then Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. It just happened to be that I thought, if I don't do it, who else would do it? So I guess it has to be me. So this is how I started.
Wow. Well, we're grateful that you did start it, and obviously that's no small feat, starting an organization. Can you walk us through the early days and the biggest challenges you faced getting people to listen when you first started?
Yes, sure. The when I started it, I was not experienced in how to run an NGO and what to do. So it was like really by try and error, step by step, really pioneer work, I would say so. And so we had basically in the first years, we followed two main paths. And one is to reach out to more doctors. I reached out to some professors in transplant medicine and invited them to be to join our advisory board. And in fact, after some discussions, what we plan to do, they joined, and that was a big step forward to reach out to the medical profession. And on the other side, I thought there is still more work needed to bring more evidence to the to the discussion. So in the first years, we focus on getting more evidence. And you can imagine it's not easy to find evidence in a totalitarian country. So it was mostly of very analytical approaches that we found more evidence. And sometimes we analyze the numbers, the data that was published from actually the Chinese side. And that helped us a lot actually to look into it and understand better what was happening.
Well, this is a topic that as I mentioned, I think is unfamiliar to many people because it's so gruesome and so unbelievable that people can't even imagine that this is happening. So, could you explain what forced organ harvesting is and why it's such a grave human rights violation?
Yes, you're right that people cannot even understand it. And when we heard about the news in 2006 in the newspaper, at that time there was even no terminology to describe what it actually is. So at that time there was a term organ trafficking, but organ trafficking is more like a commercial organ trafficking with a mutual agreement, and the organ donor usually survives. But what happened here is in the forced organ harvesting, there is no consent of the organ donor. Usually, these are vulnerable people and they are killed after or during the process of harvesting the organs. And then the cadaver will be incinerated so that there are no traces. So you can imagine that if this happens, then at one point justice will would hear about it and intervene. So, and here's another aspect of this forced organ harvesting. To become a large, almost industrial scale practice, you have to have the support from the government, meaning forced organ harvesting to become a large practice has to be state sanctioned. And these are the criteria for forced organ harvesting.
I mean, it sounds like it's something out of Nazi Germany, right? Where people are being experimented on, their organs taken, they're
Absolutely.
incinerated. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's horrific to hear that. You've been saying that this is happening in China. Is it happening anywhere else that you know of?
In this sense of like a large scale forced organ harvesting, organized forced organ harvesting, we have not seen it in any other country. There might be, organized crimes also harvest organs from individuals, but it cannot be like a large scale practice because you need to match, for example, the donor with the recipient. You need to have transplant teams, and there's a lot of logistics behind it. So that if you do it as organized crime, then at one point it would be too visible to, and then basically would open prosecution by the Justice Department. So in order to really make it a big mass production of organs, almost like farming organ donors, you have to have the support of the state. And we only saw this so far in a totalitarian state, obviously, and that is China.
Do you have any idea? Obviously, they're not putting the information out there in terms of reports, but do you have any idea how many people are killed in China for their organs? Has this practice only gone on since 2006, or that's when it came to light? Is there any information that the Chinese government is giving on this at all, or is it just all hidden?
It is mostly hidden, but if you do a little bit research, you will find that in the 1990s, China harvested organs from executed prisoners, but then it was also said from officials that the organ harvesting from executed prisoners actually was decreasing after 2000, and that's because a new source of organs, and those were living Falun Gong practitioners, emerged. As you can imagine, criminals are not always in the best health condition, and also if there's the death sentence set for next week, there is not always a recipient next week ready to receive the organ. So executed prisoners were actually not the best source of organs. And that's how it shifted to Falun Gong practitioners who were persecuted by the state since 1999. And you asked for the numbers. So based on what we know, there was no public organ donation program, and there was also no more organ harvesting from executed prisoners. So the main source of organs became Falun Gong practitioners. And then when we compare this with the published numbers of transplantations, then we saw, for example, an increase of annual transplants between 1999 to 2004 by 300%. You do not see this in other countries. Usually over a 5-year range, you would maybe see an increase by 15% of transplants, but China had 300% increase. And then the official number was about 12,000 transplants per year in 2004. But we also saw a newspaper article, a Chinese newspaper article, that mentioned 20,000 transplants per year in that year. So with the numbers the official numbers increasing, we assume that there are probably 20 to 30,000 organ donors harvested each year.
Wow. And you mentioned that they would match someone's need with and basically traffic organs from someone who's not an organ donor, not by choice, is forced organ trafficking. They're killed for their organs. So how do they know what um, Falun Gong members have the organs that would match someone? And how do they go after people? Because how many Falun Gong people are imprisoned currently?
To understand this concept, we have to first make a distinction. In the Western world, it is the transplantation is based on altruistic organ donation. If somebody passes away and is willing to donate an organ, then you go on a list and then you are called for the transplantation. And in some cases, it takes a year until you get an organ, or in the case of kidney transplants, it can take 4 to 5 years until you actually are able to receive a kidney transplant. In China, it is reversed. It is what we call an on-demand system. The patient comes to Chinese hospitals and say, I need a kidney. And then they say, okay, you can get it in 2 weeks. There were also cases from Israel where a doctor who became one of our members of that advisory board, Dr. Jay Lavi, he's a heart transplant surgeon. He had a patient in 2005. That patient was waiting for a heart, and then one day he came back and said, oh, I will get my heart in 2 weeks. And Dr. Lavi was surprised and said, how? And then the patient said, well, I go to China, and they told me on the exact date and time he should be there in 2 weeks. And sure enough, after the transplant, he returned, and he came back with a new heart that was transplanted exactly on that day. So we have an on-demand system. So the question is, where do they have the organs readily available? And this is where it becomes very abominable, I have to say, gruesome. In China, there are always dissidents that are persecuted. And they are not persecuted because they break the law, but because they have a different opinion than the government. Or in the case of Falun Gong, they follow a spiritual practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And there's nothing wrong with these principles in the rest of the world, but the Communist Party feels offended by it or maybe threatened by it. And what they did is that since 1999, they arrested and detained Falun Gong practitioners. At that time, there were probably 70 to 100 million Falun Gong practitioners in China. So imagine that's the size of the citizenship of some countries. And they were detained and arrested at a limit, maybe some estimate like a million at every time. There were about like 1 million Falun Gong practitioners detained doing forced labor or being brainwashed, being tortured. And what happened is that all these detainees that lived under these harsh conditions were actually blood tested, and that was mentioned by many, almost all Falun Gong practitioners who, after some time, were released from the detention camp. They said they were blood tested. I met one practitioner. She said she was blood tested 10 times within 2 years. And there are other cases where the blood testing became so widespread that it was the question came up: why are they blood tested if they don't get a medical treatment? And also another observation was that regular criminals who were convicted for other crimes, they were not blood tested. Yeah, so now now we come to answer your question. China has a data bank, an archive of the blood types and the medical tissue factors relevant for transplantation. And it basically just takes a few minutes to select somebody from that archive to match with the organ recipient.
So, are they going after specifically after dissidents, those who are outspoken, or any Falun Gong members, anyone who's a practitioner?
After 1999, the leader of the Chinese government, Jiang Zemin, he actually wanted to destroy Falun Gong within 3 months. That was the intention. So they started in July 1999. So within 3 months, he wanted to eradicate it, but it didn't work that way. So then he actually used the practice of forced organ harvesting to eradicate them, and we have to say in a slow motion. Yeah, so it was not. China learned in 1989 the student massacre where they killed 3,000 people in front of cameras. That caused so much, response from the international community, and that actually the Chinese economy was really almost crumbled. And so they learned from this, and they knew that we cannot eradicate Falun Gong practitioners in large scale, visible to the world. So they just used this method, forced organ harvesting, where actually doctors carry out the work of the firing squad, and the place of this eradication was the operating room. So it was kind of hidden, concealed. It had a good purpose, right? Transplant medicine. Basically, forced organ harvesting is what I call the final solution from the CCP to destroy Falun Gong. And that's why it was not just about finding organs where they could use like other groups as well or other criminals. It was basically forced organ harvesting as an instrument to target and destroy this group.
Wow. Are they, as far as you know, are they also targeting Christians, Catholics, any other minorities in China?
Yes, we heard about that, but we just don't have enough research or evidence to describe cases. But we heard about it that other minorities were also subject to this practice, to this abuse. But probably since 2018, we know more about a group of the Uyghurs in northwest China in the Xinjiang province. So they became also a targeted group of forced organ harvesting because they are Muslims, or the recipients, the patients from the Middle East, asked for organs from other Muslims. So that's where it is almost like a custom-made organ sourcing for patients from the Middle East.
You mentioned before that a patient went to China and got a new heart in 2 weeks. Is there a practice that you know of how many countries are involved in sending patients to China for receiving organs that are part of the organ harvesting program that they have there?
So far, we heard about like different countries. Some are from Asia, from Japan, from Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia. And then we also hear about patients coming from the US. Sometimes you have a conversation with someone, and then he said, "Oh, my cousin just went to China." It's not in the records, but you hear it from on the individual basis. Or we had an information booth, and a patient came up to the booth and said, "Yes, I also went to China 3 years ago." So it is basically a global, I would say, almost like a global business, and China is actively trying to include this transplant market into its Belt and Road Initiative.
Do the people who go to China know where these organs are coming from? Especially if it takes years for an organ donor in any other part of the world to become available, and someone tells them, "Well, you could go to China and get it in 2 weeks." Do you think that they know and they're just trying to pretend that it's not from a victim, from a Falun Gong member who's a victim of being killed? Basically, someone else is being killed so that this person can get an organ.
Yes. So some people, some patients are more or less desperate, especially if they are on a long wait list. They are desperate, and then they might look for other alternatives. And then they find this option to go to China. And I think some of them, they actually know that this is happening. They have heard about organ harvesting from executed prisoners or from other prisoners, but they are so desperate that they still do it. And then there are
Mm.
probably also patients who have never heard about it and just assume that China is following the same ethical guidelines that we follow here in the United States. So it's probably
Mhm.
like all of the above.
Wow, that's so scary.
Yeah, it's actually, if I may, it's actually not only scary, but also, as you said, the patient who go to China is basically triggering the execution of a prisoner of conscience, of a Falun Gong practitioner, for example. It's not an innocent issue. If you compare the Nuremberg trials after the Holocaust, there were people who were sentenced because they did something harmful, even if they said they didn't know. So not knowing is not a defense in this case. And here in this case, the patients who go to China based on this on-demand system are triggering the execution of a prisoner, and in this way they become complicit. If they know or not, they become complicit in such a crime, in an assassination, if you want. So for that reason, my wish is to inform all people in the United States and globally about this practice so that they are not lured into this crime, into this complicity. And basically, it's an issue of one's conscience.
Yes, and that's why we're doing this program. And obviously, you've dedicated your life to informing people globally and domestically about this issue because, people can be caught unawares and just think that China has more organs available, not thinking about where they're coming from and the fact that it's on an on demand system. So the minute that someone requests it, someone else gets killed for their organs. That's insane. And I've been doing a lot of bioethics, and this is not something that has come up in general conversations, and so it's something that is very hidden. and
Yes,
and we will talk about how we can bring attention to this more, and how our listeners can bring attention to this more. What are some myths or misconceptions about organ transplantation that make it easier for this practice to hide in plain sight?
you mean the misconceptions within the medical community?
Or just in the general public, right? I mean, one of the myths might be, well, this isn't actually happening, but how is it that the Chinese government can hide it, and hide it also from the global communities and also global human rights organizations?
Yeah, I think there are two parts in it. One thing is that they hide it, and the other thing is that they get support from leading medical doctors or medical associations who just turn a blind eye towards China, which I called what I called like willful blindness. So there is a sort of an agreement that you don't talk about it, let China fix it behind closed doors, and but because if you bring it up, then it could affect all organ donors, and then the organ donors would not want to sign in their countries as an organ donor anymore because they might be so shocked. So in a way, forced organ harvesting is a stain in the field of transplant medicine, and some doctors want to have it get away and seen to just get away and try that people wouldn't notice. But there are also other transplant doctors with whom we work, and they are very courageous, and they say, no, this is something bad. This is what the transplant medicine has done wrong. We have to come forth. We have to bring it to the attention and say, sorry, this is not how it's supposed to be. We want to end it. So this is on the professional side. On the public side, it's basically, I would say, the public has been deceived by the news media, and I would say it is deceived through silence. There are so many reports, independent investigations, book filling. There were webinars, plenty of possibilities to learn about it and to for the public to understand what is going on. But it always ends at the mainstream news media. They do not report about it, and that is also by design, because on the Chinese side, maybe they use blackmailing and say, well, if you write about this, then we don't invite you to our next Olympics or other big events to China, or maybe a different form of bribery. They offer the newspaper to have an insert about China in their newspaper, and then they pay an extraordinary price for this insert, like in the millions of dollars, just basically to be able to control the news media through business. In a way, the victim of the silence is the public. The public and the regular doctors who basically just focus on the patient work in the hospitals. They don't have much time. They might read, in the newspaper, but then they don't find anything that is talking about this organ harvesting. So basically, by silencing this topic, all patients, on all individuals are actually the victim of this by not knowing about it.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that there's legitimate organ donation, and we will do an episode on organ donation here in the States and in other countries. There is the risk with organ donation, even legitimate organ donation, where people's organs are taken before they die, and in such a way they're killed. But we're not talking about this in this episode. That's another episode. What we're talking about is that in China, people are killed for their organs, and it's on an as needed basis. It's an on demand basis, right? And that this is happening behind closed doors. And then you also mentioned that these organizations are turning a blind eye. I wanted to ask you which are those organizations that are turning a blind eye internationally, and also if there are NGOs or UN groups. What are the organizations that know about this and are not speaking out?
I cannot say they know about it and don't speak up about it. I don't know what they know. I don't, maybe they just ignore it and don't want to hear about anything, and they have never read our reports or so. That I cannot assess, but I can say that at least that if they haven't read our reports, we're so present everywhere, then there's at least a willful ignorance to this topic. You just mentioned that you want to have another episode on organ transplantation, also here in the US. Let me add something that is related to China. Because of the system that is happening in China, this on-demand system, China is actually rapidly increasing its knowledge about transplant medicine because they do not have to wait for organs, but just basically ask for a next surgery next day. Some doctors need a year to maybe have 20 transplant operations on their record. But in China, it's basically if you don't have 100 transplants per year, then you are not considered a strong transplant doctor. So what I mean is China has shifted the practice in the transplant field to a commercial side. They do many transplants and they do transplants with short wait times. So if you compare this just from the business perspective, the ethical transplant medicine here in the US cannot compete with the Chinese model. Soon there will be patients who are on the waiting list and say, why do I have to wait 4 years for a kidney? In China, it's only 2 weeks. Do something about it. So China is influencing the transplant medicine around the world. And that can lead to phenomena where basically in the US, the accurate process, for example, to determine brain death is shortened and they take a shortcut just to get to that organ. That might be because there is such a pressure coming from China to basically produce more organ transplants and faster.
Are they all Chinese doctors, or are there doctors who are moving to China to do this? And also, another question, is it possible for organs to be, flown and iced or whatever it might be? I'm not sure exactly if it's ever possible to send these organs to other countries where the transplantation is not happening in China, but it's using organs from Falun Gong members from China.
You have to imagine that what China is doing is a criminal practice. And the CCP is okay with that because whatever the CCP in China says is the rule. But they know that there's trouble coming from the international community. So it is rather an exception that they invite doctors from outside China to come perform organ transplantation. Maybe if they have Chinese roots or so, then or are very much on the side of China, so that in that case they might trust them. But it is very rare. If so, then it's only the part of the organ transplantation, not the organ harvesting, where those doctors would work. It is China tries to hide this forced organ harvesting, and I heard from one of our advisors. He was a kidney transplant surgeon from Malaysia. He said before 2006, before the breaking news, the patient from Malaysia went to China for transplant, returned, and had a letter from the doctor that would describe the procedure and the medication. But after 2006, after the news broke, then the patient returned without a letter. So there was no tracing possible which doctor did the transplantation, what were the complications in the surgery, what is the medication, nothing. So that's a way to hide the practice. And for that reason, you cannot expect that they would really invite Western doctors to the part that affects the forced organ harvesting, maybe for transplants, but that's very rare. Yes, there are possibilities to transplant organs with, as you say, with cooling boxes, but there's still a limitation on that despite these inventions. So, and also if they transport an organ, they would basically answer to the question, where did this organ come from? How did the donor die? That could basically open up other traces that the Chinese government tries to hide.
Hmm. So now anyone who goes to China and for an organ transplantation doesn't get any information about their procedure there? Is that what you're saying? That they don't know much about that they won't actually have proof of who their doctor was in China
Yes,
or anything
yes.
else about the procedure.
Yeah, that's what we heard. They, maybe the transplant surgeon is walking into the patient room and shakes hands, but that would not be enough to really determine who did the surgery. So it's really about trying to conceal any information regarding this practice.
And those transplant surgeons must know where these organs are coming from, right? They're basically employees of the CCP, correct? Do you think that that most or all of these transplant surgeons know exactly what's happening? Or do you think that any of them are under any misconception?
Yes, the doctors in China, they know. You can imagine they also talk to each other as colleagues. So maybe not everyone is involved in it, but then they hear from others that the organs are coming from Falun Gong practitioners. But they also know if they would talk about it, their life is at danger. There was a case a few weeks ago where a medical student, he started to text I think on social media that they take organs from living prisoners, from living people, and he talked about it. What we are basically now discussing, and a few days later, it was said he fell out of a window in a high-rise building and died. And then they went after his parents, but the parents already knew that this would happen, and they basically flew into the countryside or so. But if
Yeah.
you talk about organ harvesting, if you leak information about forced organ harvesting, your life is in danger in China.
Have you encountered resistance or challenges in bringing this issue to light? And when you raise this issue internationally, who has given you the most resistance, and what kind of pushback or denial have you encountered? And what do you say in response to that?
Yeah, that touches on your earlier question about the which medical organizations were involved. That goes hand in hand. So the biggest resistance that we are facing, other than not knowing about it, other than ignorance and silence, the biggest active resistance is sadly coming from medical associations here in the United States. I want to elaborate on this. Um, our organization, DAFOH, went to several transplant congresses to inform doctors. And in the past, our information was well received by other doctors. But when we applied for a booth in the exhibition hall of the American Transplant Congress in 2024, they just rejected our application, which is very unusual because they are actually happy to have people in the exhibition hall, basically paying money,
Right.
a fee. So we asked why. Why would you not give us permission? And the answer that we got by email was, believe it or not, the sentence was, we decided to take a different direction. And that was really shocking because I told this story to several doctors, and they were immediately reacting, what? That is not a response. It is basically embarrassing for highly educated field as the medical field that organizers would give such a meaningless answer. So it was not the content. There was no problem with our content. It was just we take a different direction. And then the same happened when we applied for the World Transplant Congress. There are in both cases there are 2-3 American transplant organizations as behind these congress as an organizer. So basically the rejection is coming most likely from the medical associations who organize these congresses. And that's very disappointing. In one case, they asked us after 2 months, they said, well, we want to review your case, but you have to send us all material that you want to place on the table. And they even added almost like a threat to it, saying if we would add any information on the during the exhibition that would not be attached to the email right now, then they would keep the right to kick us out of the event. So basically, they wanted to make us share all the information that we want to put on the show in our booth in the exhibition. And honestly, I've never heard that practice. I've never heard that any other organizer has to provide information about their content, about their message in the booth, provided to the organizer. So that was already a strange request. But then, sure enough, I almost expected it. A week later, they said, "No, we stay with our decision. We don't give you a booth." So basically, they just wanted to spy on our latest information. Just wanted to have our information for themselves, but didn't allow us to talk to the doctors. And I want to mention a point here. It is actually not us who were rejected as an NGO. It is actually the 4,000 medical doctors, the attendees of the Congress, the attending medical doctors who were prevented, who were stopped from receiving our information. They are actually the victims, because now they didn't have the chance to learn what we know. They didn't have the chance to make up their own mind, to look into our data. These are all educated doctors. I'm sure enough they will see very quickly if we have junk information or real information. And so far, I can tell you, when I talk to doctors, I would say more than 95% or more than 98% of the doctors, they say, wow, this is really concerning. They say that what we found, our analysis, this is really something that needs to be investigated further. So, but in this case, the Congress organizers, they actually punished their own members, their own 4,000 attendees, to not receive our information. And this is something we hope we can recover from. And we hope that these doctors still have a chance to learn about this practice.
It's mind-blowing that these medical organizations wouldn't want to bring attention to what's happening. Why not? In doing so, they are basically being complicit with what's happening, unless they don't think it's happening. Is that the case? Or why would they not want this information to get to their doctors? This is a clear-cut case of egregious ethical abuses, medical ethical abuses, right? And it just seems like in any other field, you would want to bring attention to something like this.
Yes, it poorly reflects on the transplant profession, I have to say. It doesn't affect all transplant surgeons. As I said, we work with some of professors and doctors in the transplant field, and they are some of the best doctors I've met. They really want to stop this. They are really engaged, and they really want to stop this practice for the benefit of the patients and the profession. But unfortunately, we are facing this situation, and I think it is partially because some of them, maybe they want to protect China. And when I hear this, I say, well, you want to protect China, but who protects the victims? There are people who are being killed. Why would you take the position of the Chinese government and protect the perpetrator? This is something that has no place in the medical field. Yeah, if you, for example, if you hear about like a pharmaceutical drug that has side effects, it just takes five or 10 patients with side effects, and then the medication would be stopped and investigated. Here, we are following this case for 25 years. More than 1 million people are probably killed for their organs in this time frame, and there's no reaction. There's not even the willingness to sit down with our NGO, to sit down and go through the data that we have compiled, go through our analysis. There's nothing. In some we even met with some doctors from those organizations who were in the ethics committee, but there was no action. My guess is that comes from the leadership, from the top, and they want to suffocate this topic. And maybe because there's a conflict of interest with China, that I cannot say, but we just want to have an open conversation that is part of the scientific method that we apply on a daily basis. You give our information, I listen to your information. We do a peer review. We look at the data, and then we decide if there's something or not. That's all what we want. We want to have an open discussion, transparent discussion.
Absolutely. So, what has been the response of the United Nations and other international bodies that are supposed to protect human rights?
It is almost similar to the medical leadership, I would say. Between 2012 and 2018, we organized a petition, a campaign globally. We went to 50 states and regions and collected 3 million signatures. Those are only the 3 million, only those who signed, but there were probably even more who were on our side but just didn't want to sign. But we had 3 million signatures. We went to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva and met with the High Commissioner because our petition was addressed to the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we brought up this topic and said, there is a request from the public to look into forced organ harvesting in China. What is the UN doing? But we actually met 3 times with the office. And they listened. They said, "Yeah, we will consider it," but we have not seen any visible action that would even refer to forced organ harvesting or to our petition, etc. So there is, again, we have this either willful blindness or this concerted silence from these large organizations. And if you understand that China has a big influence in the UN, then it also would not surprise you that there is basically no action coming from the United Nations.
Hmm. And that petition, what year again was that petition delivered to them?
So we collected signatures between 2012 and 2018, and the first time we delivered signatures was in I think in at the end of 2012. We went a second time in 2013, and I think another was in 2015.
Wow. I mean, it's been so many years and no response. They've known about this too. You've
Yes,
given them the information about this.
yes,
So it's
yes,
not a matter that you just delivered it and they're making a decision. This has been sitting with the UN and they have not done anything about it. Is that correct?
yes. Yes,
Mm.
and they know about it. There were even from in 2019 there was a so-called China Tribunal, and the attorney that worked with this China Tribunal went to the UN Human Rights Council and held a speech for about 2 minutes in the assembly. So definitely you can say they know about it. They just choose not to act on it.
What has been the most effective way to raise awareness about forced organ harvesting on a global scale? And have you seen any examples where media coverage has made a tangible impact?
Yes, you actually answered the question yourself. The most effective way is to go through media, through public, and we did this in different ways. We organized we organized a series of webinars where in different countries where we inform about it. Then we organized a so-called World Summit on combating and preventing forced organ harvesting. That was in 2021 where we organized webinars over 6 days and had speakers from 39 speakers from all over the world. This World Summit has been viewed by approximately more than 1 million people. And we published articles in medical professional journals, then in regular journals, op-eds, We are participating in podcasts. We are visiting officials and be somewhat an expert or an advisor for congressmen who introduce a bill on this issue. So we basically use the whole spectrum. What we do is basically where the regular mainstream news media fails to bring the information to the public. That's what we are doing. We are basically replacing the news media.
What countries have been alongside you and leading the charge in bringing awareness to this? And obviously, besides China, what other countries have stayed silent?
So there are several countries who actually took action, but then sometimes it just becomes like one action. So and then they don't follow up. So I don't want to not mention them, but in terms of who are the leading countries, I would say it is the United States, it's United Kingdom, Canada, and Taiwan.
That are leading the charge to stop this practice.
They are leading the charge. They are very mindful in designing their laws. They even have revisions to basically improve the law, make it more specific, like that. There was a case in Taiwan. So in the US, we had a House resolution in 2016. That's the House Resolution 343. And currently, there is a bill in the House, a bill, not only a resolution, a bill in the Congress. It passed in the House side in May, and now it is basically sitting in the Senate. So the Senate has to pass this bill, and then it would become a law. So we are waiting now for the Senate. And if your viewers want to take action, please call the 2 senators of your state. Every state has 2 senators. Call them and ask them to support the Senate bill S817. It's 817. That's the number of the bill, and that would basically help the United States to protect its citizens by not going to China, and also would stop perpetrators from China to enter our country. Imagine, like we don't want, during the Holocaust, we didn't want Nazi doctors coming to the United States. They don't have a place here. And the same is with doctors who participated in this crime against humanity of forced organ harvesting. We don't want to have them in the country either. So that bill 817 on the Senate side, that would help a lot.
Yes, and this bill is called the Falun Gong Protection Act, and it was co-sponsored by Representative Perry and Senator Cruz. And again, it's now sitting in the Senate, Senate Bill 817. So what's holding it up, and what needs to happen for it to pass in the Senate and be signed by the president?
Yeah, so Scott Perry was the congressman who introduced it on the House side, and Senator Cruz introduced it on the Senate side. Basically, it has to pass the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a committee that is taking care of any bills that are related to foreign affairs, foreign relations. So at the moment, it is basically stuck in this committee. And the next step is to just ask the chairman of the Senate to bring it to a vote. We are confident that we will find enough people to vote for it, because this is about a human rights. Which senator would basically, by voting a no, which senator would want to give China a green light to continue with forced organ harvesting? And that's basically the issue. And for example, on the House side, the House bill passed unanimously. There was not a single opposing voice to it. And that makes sense, right? They understand that nobody wants to give China a green light to continue forced organ harvesting. Nobody wants to be silent on this topic. So once it gets to a vote in the Foreign Relations Committee, then we think there is a good chance that it will quickly go to the president's desk.
Wow, so it was passed unanimously in the House, and we hope that it'll be passed unanimously in the Senate. And we just, again, call your senators to ask them to vote on this really important bill. That's something that you can do. Who can stop China? What needs to happen that so that China stops this egregious, horrible practice?
Many people or officials are sort of afraid of China, but actually there's no reason to be afraid, because in the Chinese society, keeping one's faith, being considered to be flawless, that is like a must-have. So if all of a sudden there would be a large discussion around the world, even if it's just in the United States, if everyone in the United States would know about forced organ harvesting, would talk about it, would bring it up in the social media, if it would go viral, the Chinese government would be embarrassed, and they would not dare to continue. They would rather continue to hide all traces. I give you an example. The student massacre happened in 1989. The world reacted unanimously against this mass shooting, and this basically triggered a lot of changes within China, that they actually realize they cannot just crush down on democracy movements in this scale. So China, even more now, even more so today, is so much linked to export. Imagine if countries around the world would be so dismayed by forced organ harvesting, they would say, "Oh, this goes too far. That's something we cannot tolerate," and then they stop accepting exports from China. Then the Chinese economy would collapse within weeks. So basically, China appears to be powerful, but it is actually extremely fragile. Because if the international community would learn about this abominable, completely unacceptable practice of forced organ harvesting, then the reactions on China could be tremendous. And that's basically what we are working for. We want to inform, we want to reach this level of people who know about it, to let it go viral. And once this topic goes viral, I'm sure it will end soon.
Yeah, so people, we all have power to help stop this. It's not something like, well, it's
Exactly.
happening in China, I have no control. It's talking about it. It's calling your legislators and
Yes.
asking them to do something about it. And for those who
Yes.
are outside of the U.S. who are listening, you can always contact your legislators and ask them to introduce bills that are similar to the one
Exactly.
that is being in the process here in the U.S. because we can all stop it. So besides calling legislators, what can your average citizen do to help with this?
Well, again, it is simple. We don't have to rely on our representatives on Congress or parliaments. It is one of the many ways we can reach awareness and trigger actions. But it's actually the power of the individual that is so massive, especially in times of social media. Instead of sharing your latest recipe with your friends, why not also sharing this information about forced organ harvesting with your friends, your colleagues, your family? Let them know about it and ask them to share this information even with their friends, families, and colleagues. Let it go viral, especially in times of social media. This can be done like within days, and this is a crime. The systematic harvesting, killing, and harvesting of organs for the purpose of earning money through transplantation, that has no place in our society. Imagine we are doing deals, trades with China, we are buying products from China, but at the same time, China is a mass murderer. It's killing people
Mhm.
for their organs. That is not something we can just ignore. So there's a huge story behind this forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. There is this complete um, absence of ethics and any trust that you can have in the system. You are basically being deceived. The patients who go to China, they are being deceived. They are told these are all donors from our donor system. They are being deceived. So then, why doing business with a country that by default is trying to deceive you? So with this in mind, if the individual just realize this is something we are not only doing for the people in China, but we are doing to ourselves, to protect ourselves, to protect us against this deceptive regime in China, then actually it should, you cannot stop that. You can bribe organizations, leaderships, but you cannot bribe like millions and billions of individuals who resort to their social media to spread the word.
I should have asked you this earlier, but when they are killing individuals for organs, are they taking a number of their organs? Are they storing them? Or are they just on demand? Someone needs a heart, someone needs a liver. They're killing them for that one organ. Do you know what's happening to the rest of the organs before they incinerate the body?
It's on demand. So there is a concrete person who asks for an organ. So they will first take that organ from the source, harvest that organ, and then if there are other people who are also other doctors who say, well, I need corneas for a patient or another organ, they might take one or two more organs. In average, you have about 3 organs per organ donor that you are removing. You cannot store them for a long time. Depending on which organ, you have to transplant it between 6 hours to 24 hours to 48 hours. So that's basically the time frame that you can keep that organ alive for transplantation. So taking all organs out and put them in the freezer, that doesn't work.
Are they using any of the organs for research? Do you know?
That's a good question. We don't have much information about this, so I cannot speak from informed position. I assume that, for example, pharmaceutical drugs. Usually there are clinical trials and they take 10 years. It needs 10 years to test a new drug in clinical trials. When you go to China, they say, "Oh, we can clinically test that drug within 2 years." So, and that is not an urban legend. That has been described by experts. So China is busy doing drug tests within 2 years. So how come? How can they accelerate it so much? And I'm afraid that they just skip any animal tests and any other tests and just go right away to the person and hand out and basically, for example, inject the drug into that prisoner of conscience, and then basically use prisoners of conscience as like lab rats, where they can see within 2 years, if the dosage was too high, too low, or if there are side effects. So I'm worried that the same people who are subject to forced organ harvesting are also subject for example, clinical testing. Again, I don't have evidence on that. I just have the time frame that China says they can do this within 2 years. So that's what triggers my thinking here.
Yeah, and, of course, why wouldn't they? If they're willing to kill, prisoners of
Exactly.
conscience for their organs, why
Exactly.
wouldn't they just test, and treat them like lab rats, like you said?
Exactly.
Um, so, obviously, what would hit China is, their bottom line if countries said, "We're not going to trade with you if you continue these human rights abuses." But then there's others who argue that raising these issues could strain diplomatic relations. What do you have to say to that?
Well, this is a very strange approach to say we tolerate killing people for their organs just to maintain diplomatic relations with a country. First of all, this is completely unacceptable, unethical. But secondly, you're wondering, why do you want to maintain diplomatic relations with a country that is basically using barbaric methods to go after its opponents, or go after people they don't like,
Right.
dissidents, prisoners of conscience. They just eliminate them on demand, kill them for their organs. Who would want to have diplomatic relations with this country if there is no basis for an ethical exchange of thought? Basically, you go into a conversation, diplomatic conversation, you have an agreement. Guess what? The Chinese part will not follow up with this with the agreement, and will just continue to build, for example, coal industries, CO2 producing industries, etc., while demanding from the US to reduce the CO2 output. So it's basically from the very beginning an non-genuine diplomatic conversation that you have. In order to have diplomatic relations, you should have some kind of similar thinking, a similar basis of what goes and what not.
Absolutely. And that really begs the question, are we still why do we have any trade with China? Obviously there's a lot of things involved in that, because unfortunately we become so dependent on China. But it brings the question, why are we still negotiating anything with China? We should take production out of China. What's your take on all of that? And do you know if, besides this bill that has passed the House, is there anything that the current administration is doing to put a stop to this? Do you know if these conversations have ever come up in negotiations with China?
I don't know. I don't know if the administration has mentioned forced organ harvesting to the Chinese side, or if they follow a different approach. That I don't know. Um, it is basically up to the administration to decide how they want to approach, but they need to think of the consequences. For example, in 2020, we were hit by a pandemic. It destroyed parts of our economy. It killed so many people. Depending on which country, the whole world was suffering from this pandemic. And what happened was that after the virus was leaking, China knew it was contagious, because in the middle of January 2020, they imposed a quarantine on the city of Wuhan. And if they do so, they must know it is contagious. Otherwise, why would you do a quarantine on the city? So they knew it's contagious. But then a week later, when the Italian foreign minister talked to his equivalent from the Chinese side and asked, do we have to restrict the air traffic? The Chinese side said, no, we don't need to reduce the air traffic. It's not contagious. 2 months later, they admitted in March 2020, yeah, it's contagious. No more air traffic. So the Chinese side knew it's contagious, but it deliberately did not provide this information to the rest of the world. It was, I guess, either they tried to hide the leakage, or they were happy with causing a pandemic. So you, I was not surprised when the pandemic occurred. I was absolutely not surprised, because I already expected that something like this would happen, because China has no ethical obligation. They have no understanding for ethics. They don't want to consider ethical standards. Anything can happen. Then I ask you, why would you do business with China, with someone that can crush you at any time, at moment's notice? And then you even give all your intellectual property to China if you want to open a company in China. So basically, all the research that you have put into a product, you have to show to the Chinese side. In a way, they can get to their own industry within days, because they have all the information how to produce that product. So it's
Hmm.
um, there is nothing good to report about communist China. They don't. They have their own ruling. Only the CCP is in charge. They cannot tolerate other opinions by design. So it's that's pretty much my answer to your question.
Mhm. Mhm. What moments in your work have been most emotionally taxing and which have been the most rewarding?
You know, I mentioned it before. It seems strange, but although this forced organ harvesting is happening in China, the most depressing experience I had was were with doctors from for example, from the United States, who rather protected China than looking into it, who rather tried to block us than trying to help us. In one case, we have organized in collaboration with a student club at Harvard University a forum on forced organ harvesting. We reached out to doctors from the Harvard Medical School in Harvard. We invited them. We got RSVPs of about 50 doctors who said they would come. Then at the actual event, nobody came, and we didn't know what was happening. So one of our speakers was a professor at Harvard, and he actually told us he received an email from a professor, a transplant, a professor for transplant medicine, who also previously had worked at Harvard. He received an email, and that email was almost like a hate email where this doctor was saying, "Don't go to this forum. Things have changed. China has changed now. They don't do this anymore, and we have no good information." I've seen that email, so it's true. It really happened, and it was so disappointing that a doctor, a professor from Harvard, was sending out this email to medical colleagues to basically dissuade them to attend our forum. So that's almost like sabotaging our forum, our event. These things were the most disheartening and most disappointing events. On the plus side, the most beautiful moments were when we presented our information to doctors, and within 5 minutes they say, "Wow, this I have never heard it. This is so good that you do this. Thank you for doing what you're doing." So these moments when we touched the heart of another doctor, those were the most beautiful and rewarding moments.
Hmm. Yes, and we thank you for all the work that you're doing. Are there lessons from your advocacy that apply to other hidden human rights violations in medicine in both China and anywhere else around the world?
Yes, there are. I think that like it is one of the most important aspects in transplant medicine is transparency. It's not only transparency in terms of where the organs come from, how did the organ donor pass away, what happened. It's not only the medical transparency, but it's also the transparency towards the patient, especially in transplant medicine, where you have a recipient, a donor, and the doctor. There are three people involved, and transparency is the key factor to build up trust. So transparency leads to trust. Without transparency, you have some doubts or some suspicion. So trust is so important, and transparency is a way to get to the trust. And for example, when we had this pandemic, and there was this discussion about the vaccine that came out just very quickly, almost too quickly, and then other doctors said, "Well, ivermectin would also have." We the discussion about ivermectin has been suffocated, but I would have wished that we have that we follow our scientific method and doing research and have a discussion about it. For example, if you had 100 patients who take the vaccine and 100 patients who take ivermectin, and you run a small study over 3 months, that would have helped us so much to come to a evidence-based decision on how to handle this pandemic. But instead, and it would be transparent, but instead there were decisions decisions made, and we didn't actually know how these decisions came about and who made this decision. So it was a little bit murky. So definitely transparency is almost like the big brother of medical ethics. So I can only emphasize this again and again. Transparency leads to trust, and trust is needed in medicine.
Absolutely. So, beyond organ harvesting, what do you think this issue reveals about global healthcare ethics, international law, and human rights enforcement?
This is an interesting question. Usually, medical topics stay within the medical community and are being discussed within the medical community. But what we are seeing here is that there's a political influence, and it comes, there's pressure from China on this political influence, and that changes how we handle this medical abuse. Instead, for example, if we hear about a virus outbreak in Africa, then the UN or WHO is interested to quickly send a team to find out what is happening, to diagnose it, and to treat it. When we say there are 1 million people over the past 25 years who were killed for forced organ harvesting in China, the WHO does not invite or facilitate an independent investigation into China. So, so you can see that this is not based on a medical decision, but it's based on political interests to decide when to send out investigative teams and when not. And that's something it needs to change if these organizations want to earn the trust of the people.
And I think that more pressure needs to be put on these organizations that are supposed to protect human rights worldwide. Speaking of which, how can governments and organizations and the medical profession itself better uphold and ethical standards worldwide?
Um, it's supposed to come within the medical community. I mean, doctors are highly educated, and there are so many doctors, and many doctors absolutely stand for ethics. So they should actually come from inside the medical field and push for more transparency and ethical rules. Remember, ethics itself is not just a gentleman's game, a gentleman's philosophy to think about things. Medical ethics is the driving force in research, because research always tries to find better solutions, and the definition for the better solution is coming from ethics, where they say, well, if you take this drug, the patients are vomiting. Can you improve the drug that the people are not vomiting? So it's basically from the ethical side that sets new standards and say, improve it, find a way that is less intrusive, less painful. So ethics in medicine is actually absolutely important, essential to find good medicine. Ethical medicine serves good medicine. That's what we have to understand. So doctors can help to trigger that, to generate this discussion in the medical field. Then what we also need is public pressure. We need to inform the public, and the public needs to be more outspoken, need to take more action, and to ask these governments or organizations to, for example, investigate this forced organ harvesting. These 3 million people who signed our petition, they asked the different organizations to look into forced organ harvesting. They are still waiting for an answer. Yeah, these 3 million people. So public pressure, conversation in the public, always in the public, breaking through the silence, that will put governments and organizations on notice.
Yeah, and it sounds like we need to go back to basics, back to the Hippocratic Oath, and first do no harm, right? The ends don't justify the means. You can't just kill someone for an organ. It's just basic ethics that it sounds like not only obviously China is just has lost, but also people who are complicit by staying silent, by trying to cover it up, by not giving you a platform to share the truth with other people. Can people still sign that petition if they want to? Is that still available?
We have a new petition. That petition ended in 2018 because we just realized that the UN, no matter how many million signatures we will deliver, they won't act. We have a new petition that is the FOH petition.org on the website fohpetition.org. This petition is reaching out to a selection of governments, mainly the G7 governments, to take action to bring this up, to bring up forced organ harvesting in conversations with China. So this petition is about. I think we launched it last year. This is now about like 1 year out there, and we are about to hit the 500,000 signatures this December, right to the International Human Rights Day. So this is our new petition that is addressing the governments. I say it again, fohpetition.org.
And we will certainly link to it on the episode page for the resources so that everyone can sign. At the very least, everyone can sign the petition, share it with their friends and family, contact your legislator, and continue to bring awareness about this issue. How do you think medical ethics education should change or adapt based on some of these human rights abuses, the one that obviously we're talking about today, and other human rights abuses? Do you think that anything needs to change in how we train our doctors and what is happening around the world?
Yeah. I think there should be changes, and these changes should be actually carried, especially this abuse, forced organ harvesting. We need to understand that our ethical education is not considered to be a very important subject. So it is often just sidelined and is taking care of smaller issues. So there's almost like it has become lethargic to think about ethics. Somebody will take care of the issue, so I don't need to take care of it. But this forced organ harvesting has shown a different situation, where if you don't pay attention to it, it can become the most abominable, most heinous abuse of the medical practice in the century. And this is how we call it at the moment. Forced organ harvesting is the most egregious violation of medical ethics of the 21st century. And here we are. What do we do about it? We didn't expect that. We almost cannot believe it. And yet it happened. So ethics is something we need to be prepared that the worst of the worst can happen. We need to have our antennas to see if a huge violation of ethics is actually happening. And I understand many doctors, especially those in patient care, they don't have much time. I was in their shoes, in the same shoes. You don't have much time. But then you spend time on doctors' letters. You even read articles, professional articles from medical journals. So my question is, isn't it possible that you spend 1% of your spare time, 1% of the time, to look into forced organ harvesting as the extreme variant of the medical abuse and make yourself knowledgeable? Don't delegate it to the leadership in the medical associations. They can be influenced, they can be bribed, there can be corruption, etc., for different reasons or in different contexts. But don't give it out of your hands. You are a medical doctor. You are as much responsible for the medical profession as any leader in a medical organization. So why don't you try to spend like 1% of your time and look into forced organ harvesting in China of Falun Gong practitioners and see what you can do in your area to stop it? Be creative. I was creative in the sense that 20 years ago, I just decided to start an NGO. There can be other ways, for example, hosting an event having in a Grand Tour the a presentation on forced organ harvesting. So this is something everyone can do. It doesn't have to be like a big effort. Just 1% of the spare time would actually already suffice to make you an informed on this matter. I want to add another aspect that I didn't mention earlier: disbelief, or unable to believe what is going on. That has been happened in history before. There was a politician, a diplomat. His name was Jan Karski. He was a Polish diplomat. During the World War II, he went to the ghetto in Warsaw, and he saw how Jewish detainees were deported in trains, etc. So he understood that there was a mass extermination of Jews going on. Then he went to America and went to the Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. He told his story. He said, "I've seen this is happening in the ghettos." And then the Felix Frankfurter replied, "I cannot believe you." And then the ambassador, the Polish ambassador who was with the delegation, he said, "Are you saying Jan Karski is lying?" And then the justice said, "I didn't say he's lying. I just cannot believe him." This is something where we can learn something from it. Because of his disbelief, he did not initiate any advisory to take action in Europe. And it basically took another year before the US were actually taking part in the war on the European continent. But what happened here is the disbelief of the justice was dismissing the evidence that Jan Karski has provided. So from this, we need to learn something. Disbelief should never dismiss any evidence. Yeah, but maybe we don't understand the evidence, but we cannot dismiss that evidence based on disbelief. And the same is happening with forced organ harvesting. It seems so impossible, like dystopian, that we would not believe this is happening. But don't stop there. Look at the evidence and do your own research to find out what is happening.
What an important message for us with that. And similarly, have you met people or encountered eyewitnesses, people who were not afraid, who were to stand up, either from China or who've had a very immediate contact with that situation? Have you met people who have basically come out and said, "I saw this," or "I know for sure this is happening because of so and so reason"? Have you encountered those people?
Yeah, so I during these past 20 years, I interviewed many Falun Gong practitioners, and their testimony is it's like a puzzle, and each testimony is almost like a piece of the puzzle. If you just hear that piece, you might not see the full picture, but if you put it together, then you see the full picture. So in one case, a female practitioner, said that when she was detained on one day, all 200 females from the detention camp who were Falun Gong practitioners were taken in 20 buses to the hospital, and all of them underwent blood testing and further medical examination. In another case, there was a single practitioner who was detained, and then they asked him to get out, and then he returned, and then the other jail inmate, he asked him, "What did you do?" "Oh, they took blood from me. They are really taking care of my health." And then the other prisoner, he was laughing and said, "They don't care. They don't take care of your health. They take your blood to match you for organ transplantation." Then there was two more cases that were like very shocking to me. Again, a Falun Gong practitioner was arrested. He was taken to the hospital. They wanted to take blood, and then he said, "No, I don't want you to take my blood." "Why not?" "Because I know what you want to do with me. You want to take my organs." And then the policeman in the room, he said, "That's exactly what we want to do." So
Wow.
this practitioner, he escaped and came to the US, and he told me this story. So there are plenty of similar stories. Each story is somewhat individual. It's not like they just copy and paste the testimonies. That's not the case. Every witness who is able to escape from detention camp has their own story, and that makes it so valuable.
Wow. Do you know of any doctors who were practicing who decided that they could no longer do that and left China?
Actually, I mentioned the first whistleblower pseudonym is Annie. So she was working in a hospital in China, and that's where her husband confessed to her that he was taking organs
Mm.
from Falun Gong practitioners, and they afterwards they said we have to move out of China, so they moved to Canada. And so this is one example where they escaped, but this happened before 2006. 2006 was the year when we had the breaking news about forced organ harvesting. Before that, everything was a little bit more lax and relaxed and not so controlled. So at that time, doctors could still leave the country. But after 2006, the Chinese government has put on so much restrictions and control on the doctors that is almost impossible. If a doctor would basically would try to leave and then would be found at the airport or train station at the border, probably he would be taken to a field outside and executed, or he would fell out of a high rise building.
Mm.
These days, it's very rare to find doctors who can provide us with more information.
Well, I think that what you were mentioning earlier about uh, doctors just spending 1% of their time, or even just any public any person can spend time bringing attention to this issue. But from a medical perspective, I think that a lot of doctors might fear losing their positions, speaking out, and then from a personal perspective, there's probably people who are afraid that their jobs will be affected, or even that the Chinese government might go after them. What do you have to say to those who are afraid to speak out, who know about the issue but are afraid to speak out?
You see, if you're afraid to speak out, then you actually put yourself into a mental jail, into a mental prison. You're not free anymore. The idea is you speak up freely and stop it so that you are free afterwards. But if you not speak up because you are afraid, you will stay in that mental prison for the rest of your professional life. You know that this is wrong. Every doctor knows that killing a patient for an organ is wrong. You know it. You don't are afraid to speak it. That makes you basically already. It puts pressure on your conscience. It is really something that medical doctors should think about. Why did you choose to become a medical doctor and not a businessman? It's because you want to help people. Why don't you want to help the people, the victims in the detention camps who are about to be organ harvested? Why don't you want to help those people? And including want to help our citizens not to be complicit in it? All because of fear, because of repercussions. No, instead, you should actually help to broaden the outreach and make it even more public. Because if you have thousands of doctors who speak about it, actually, it makes your life safer in a way. So fear is not a good advisor.
Have you ever faced threats, intimidation, or ethical dilemmas personally because of your work? And if so, from whom? And how did you navigate those?
Where in the early years, I got voice messages on my phone. They were spoken in Chinese, and I got a translation for it. They said, "There's a package for you at the Chinese embassy. Come to the Chinese embassy to pick it up." So, and those were voice messages. I think I got, I don't know, between 15, no, maybe 10 to 15 times I got this call recorded on my cell phone. But then it also stopped at one point because I guess it didn't, they realized I don't respond to it. The issue with the safety is real. However, I would say that because of the strategy to silence this topic, basically it is that also creates some protection for us, because if something would happen to our NGO, it is basically it would become a newsworthy article, and that would actually help us to spread our news. So I assume that in terms of safety, whoever would want to interfere with us is also, balancing between what can we actually achieve and how much would that actually serve that the news could actually go into mainstream media. Yeah, and so basically the tactic of silence is probably part of our safety concept, if you want.
What is DAFOH focusing on next, and how can listeners get involved and support the cause?
Yeah, so I mentioned it before. So right now we have this new petition running. We call it G7+7 petition because we are addressing the countries of the G7 and selected another 7 countries which we want to approach with this petition. So this petition, fohpetition.org, would be one step, and the other is that we plan a webinar series in early December, on December 9th and 10th. Those are the anniversary of the Genocide Convention and the Day for International Human Rights. We will have webinars with very interesting, very great speakers. This information will be on our website soon in the next days. Our website is dafoh.org. And lastly, what we are right now focusing on is this bill in the Senate Bill 817. So if you can help and call your senators, 2 senators of your state, that would be highly appreciated.
And we will also link to your webinars so that people can learn more on this topic from your guests as well. Looking ahead, what gives you hope that this practice can be stopped?
It's interesting. We have a long path, 20 years. At the beginning, when I started our NGO, I didn't really know much about it, how to run an NGO. And then I learned, well, it takes about 10 years before you're recognized. So the first 10 years basically is just work so that other people get to know you, learn from you, taking you serious. So it takes 10 years. Then it also takes a long time, many years, to change the level of information or the level of actions in the society. So based on the first 10 years, the second 10 years that we experienced was probably the time that was needed to trigger actions and responses, and more like campaigning in the awareness in the society. And this is what we are seeing now. In the past, I would say in the past 1 to 2 years, we have seen an uptick of awareness on this topic. Dramatic increase of awareness. Just in this year, I was, I think, invited to 10 podcasts to talk about this topic. There are more politicians who come forth to support it, to even speak on TV, national TV, about forced organ harvesting in China and about the bill. So there is now, I would say, more and more clarity and courage among leaders in the society who step forward and make it a topic. So I have rather a positive outlook that this topic will soon reach the critical mass and then become viral.
Well, with all of your work and your organization's work, I'm very hopeful as well because you have done so much to bring awareness to this issue. And lastly, if you could deliver one message to policymakers, medical professionals, and the general public, what would that message be?
Basically, you think of there are patients on the waiting list, and then they are desperate, and then they take advantage of what the communist regime offers them, which is a crime. Somewhat, the patient who goes to China for an organ is also complicit in a murder. Right? We talked about it. So, in order to protect our citizens, our patients, but also our doctors and hospitals and universities, we need to publicly speak about forced organ harvesting. We need to carry this information into every household. And we have to stop collaborating with China in the field of transplant medicine. There is no doubt that forced organ harvesting occurred in China and is still occurring. And for that reason, we cannot just relax and be silent. We need to speak up to end it. And actually, there are two aspects of speaking about it. One is related to the practice, forced organ harvesting. One is related to the main victim of forced organ harvesting, which is Falun Gong. We need to break the silence for each of these two parts. We need to talk about forced organ harvesting, break the silence, to make the medical community aware of this medical abuse. But in order to stop this forced organ harvesting, to defeat forced organ harvesting, we need to take away the incentive from the Chinese government. The Chinese government uses forced organ harvesting as the final solution to destroy Falun Gong, the main victim. So if we start talking about Falun Gong, if we start to learn a little bit more about what is Falun Gong, what is the practice of truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, what about this practice? You actually defeat the purpose, the incentive for the CCP to carry out forced organ harvesting. Because if the whole world knows about Falun Gong, there's no reason for the CCP to continue using this group of prisoners of conscience as an organ source. So, in one word, break the silence, speak about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trey, for sharing with us this very difficult and horrific human rights abuse that's happening in China currently. And thank you for all of your work in bringing attention to this issue. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Bioethics Babe podcast. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and your favorite podcast platform, and share with your friends and family. Also check out bioethicsbabe.com for the latest episodes and resources.